This video is a review of the CSS Position Property. This is a great tool, especially if you have a great race midterm you have coming up pretty soon. This is an excellent tool to help you manipulate elements on your page. It gives you the ability to pull elements away from their normal flow. In other words, where they would normally be put on the browser as the browser, on the page as the browser reads your HTML. And it pulls it out of that normal flow and puts it in a specific position. And we'll go over some examples of that. So let's first look at what we have going on this page and get familiar with the code, and then I'll show you some examples. All right, so looking at our code, I'm going to look at the HTML body. We have this image. That's this image right here. Notice that it says float right. Now, oftentimes, floats get confused with position. And I want to make sure that I establish that those are two different properties. Float has only two choices, float right or float left. And in this case, I floated this image to the right so that all other HTML code will flow alongside of it. Okay. Notice I have not applied any top, bottom, any position elements. Top, bottom, left, and right, or position, do not go with float rights. It's only float right and float left. Okay, so moving right along, we have our H1 tag, which is our header right here. We've got a div, green box, okay, and I've applied some coloring and some CSS styling to that green box. Then after that, old SpongeBob is rendered and displayed next in this particular flow. So when we talk about positioning, we're going to position SpongeBob in such a way that we don't want him to go with the normal flow, but we want to do something specific with him. We want to pull him out of the normal flow and put him somewhere else on our page. So fixed is a property that says I want him to be in an exact position in relation to my web browser. Okay, so no matter what else is going on in this code, I want SpongeBob to be a particular distance from the top of the browser window, or from the left, or from the right, or from the bottom. So position has usually two properties, the position property and where you want that positioning placed. So let's try this code on Mr. SpongeBob here and see how it makes a difference. So here's I have image, and I have a class of SP. So that would be here, which differentiates the styling on this particular image from another image that I have up, which was the float, right? Okay, so let's put position, PSTI, always spell it wrong. Oh, I spelled it wrong over there in the image. Position dot fixed. Notice that I have a little spelling error there. Sorry about that. Okay, position dot fixed. And we're going to put it from the top. Let's go 300 pixels. So this one's pretty easy. Most people understand fixed pretty well. So position Mr. SpongeBob exactly 300 pixels from the top of the browser. Okay, let's refresh that. So SpongeBob, no matter what happens to the rest of this HTML, will be 300 pixels from the top. We could try something from the left just to see how that goes. So let's move him 300 pixels from the left. Okay, we could do it from the right. Okay, and the beauty there is as I pulled my screen, he's going to move with the screen. Okay. Okay, I think you get the idea, and you can also use bottom there. So that one's pretty straightforward. This is fixed, how many positions from the top, left, right, or bottom, how many pixels in relation to the browser window. Okay, so now let's talk about position relative. So position relative is Just that, relative to whatever element is containing that which we are positioning. That's where we need to be moved left, right, top, or bottom from. That doesn't quite make sense, Kirsten. Well, let's see what we can do to figure that out. Okay, so we have SpongeBob again back down here at the beginning. I've reset everything and learned how to spell the word position here in my image, so that's good. So at the moment, SpongeBob's normal flow in our HTML coding is to come after the div, and he sits down right here. So if we were to position him relative, let's see what happens. Position relative, okay, and we're going to say right 25 pixels, okay. Let's see what happens with that. Okay, so what happened? He jumped to the left. When we use a right or left, when we use right, what that's saying is move him 25 pixels to the right from where he just was, relative to where he was supposed to be. So let's look at that again. Okay, I'm going to comment this out. We are here, so it's that kind of, okay. Save that. So let's look at where he was. Okay, notice how he moved to the right this time. So we put him back in his original flow, and we're saying relative to his original flow, which is right here. Remove our commenting, and let's look at that again. So now, because we've positioned him right, move him 25 pixels from the right of where he's supposed to be, move him over 25 pixels. So let's see so sure enough, he moved. Now, if we had wanted him to go in the other direction, we could have put a minus sign. So go in the other direction of where I just placed him. Let's see what happens with that. So he moved in this direction. So let's look at that again. I'm going to comment that out. Save that. Okay. So here's where he normally would flow without any positioning applied. Now we're going to position him 25 pixels with a negative, which means that we're going to move him in this direction. That's opposite of what you think, which is why I'm really bringing that out. Okay, so this moved him to the right, moves him over this direction towards our right, 25 pixels. Okay, well, let's move it around just to make sure we understand what relative means. So I'm going to take old SpongeBob, and I'm going to move him inside of this div, inside this green box. And the reason I'm going to do that is he's going to behave differently now. Let's get him over there first of all so you can see him. So the normal flow is he's coming right after the position, the text that we have, position relative tutorial, and then he flows right after that in a normal flow. Oh, we have a positioning applied, don't we? So we had positioning applied, so he's 25 pixels over from where he normally rendered. So got a little bit confused there, so let me reset all of this for you. So we're going to apply the positioning, the commenting. Okay, so in a normal flow, let's start again. In a normal flow, Mr. SpongeBob would appear right after the text, okay? But then we apply the positioning, and he's being moved over, remember, towards our right, negative 25. So let's remove that, commenting, and let's see him move. So now he should move 25 pixels towards our right, sure enough. Okay, so again, the relative position is relative to where he's normally supposed to flow. Let's put him in front of the words. And I'm going to take out our positioning so we can see how he would normally supposed to flow. Okay, so if I now put him in front of the text, this is how he would normally flow. And then if we applied the positioning, now he's going to move over. And I wonder what's going to happen there. Do you think he's going to go over the top of that text? Sure enough. Okay, because we've moved him to the right 25 pixels. Which puts him over the normal flow of the text that was already there. Okay. Let's try left and see what happens. Oops. Let's just go normal for now and see what happens. Okay. So now my computer will catch up to me, constantly spinning here. Position relative left should be working. Oh, right, it is. Okay, so he's moved 25 positions over, 525 pixels over from the left of where he was supposed to be. So let's see that again. Apply the comment. Let's see how he would normally supposed to be. Normally, he's supposed to be over here. But then if we apply the positioning, and obviously you can play with this so you see how it works yourself. I think this is pretty self-explanatory. Now he's moved, oh, we get our commenting incorrect. Let's try that again. Sorry about that. Okay. And now he's moved over 20. So let's do a negative left 25 and see what that does for us. Okay. I think you see how that all works. So relative to where it's supposed to flow, move it over to the left or over to the right. Play with your minus sign so you see what it is which direction it's actually going to flow. Let's try, out of curiosity, let's try top and see what happens. What do you think is going to happen there? Okay. So it pushed him up 25 from where he was normally supposed to be. So you get a lot of control over that element and where in relation to his normal flow is he going to move from and to. That one's not quite as confusing. So let's talk about absolute, because that one tends to throw people in an absolute infinite loop. Haha, pun intended. Okay, let's move on to that one. Absolute positioning is a little bit difficult to explain. It's a little confusing, so I'm going to do my best to just demonstrate it for you. I'm back to Mr. SpongeBob. That's this image here. And let's give him an absolute positioning of 50 pixels from the top. So as is, position absolute, top 50, you'll see that without any other alterations, as is, SpongeBob is being pushed down 50 pixels from the top of the browser, similar to what we did in fixed. What happens with absolute is absolute looks for whatever is containing it, its ancestors, its parents. And if something is containing whatever is being positioned absolute, if something is positioned in its parent, for example, div contains this image. So if we were to put positioning in this div, I'm going to do that. So I'm going to position the div which contains SpongeBob. Oops, got to do it right. Equals position. I have to learn to spell that word correctly. Position relative. Okay. So now the parent of SpongeBob, one of the elements that contains SpongeBob, has received a positioning. So now that that's happened, absolute will be relative to that last styling, that last position. So let's see that happening. Okay. So now SpongeBob's moved down 50 pixels from the element that contains it, one of its parents, which in this case is the div, and that div has received a positioning. So again, without that positioning, so we'll take the div out of the positioning, and now SpongeBob will not have this parent div, will not have a positioning, and so SpongeBob will be pushed down 50 pixels from the top. Okay. Get my mouse back. Looks like I left a dangling quote there. Okay. Now, I also want to draw your attention to the fact that we have given this div a position relative, but we didn't do anything with it. As is, it's not doing anything. It's received a position relative, but it didn't move because we didn't give it something like top. Let's do something extreme. Okay. So now that entire div is going to be pushed down 25 pixels from the top. The only reason why we put position relative here was to give the absolute positioning of SpongeBob a anchor, if you will, and so that SpongeBob would then be moved down from this div instead of from the browser window. Okay, so the question is, well, what's the difference then between that and relative? Well, let's look at it. The main difference between absolute and relative then is what happens to the text behind it. For example, I'm going to change we're going to keep everything the same as it was. SpongeBob is absolutely positioned. He's positioned in relation to the div because our div is positioned. Okay, but we're going to make it from the left instead of from the right. Okay, so let's see what happens. So now SpongeBob is positioned absolutely from the left 50 pixels. Okay, and see our text flows behind him. So SpongeBob is taken completely out of the flow of the HTML text. The HTML text can no longer see him. The browser can no longer render it in relation to the other elements. And the text is moved up and flows right behind SpongeBob. If, on the other hand, I had made this relative, the text moves alongside as opposed to gets completely taken out of the flow. So now the position of the text in this case goes exactly where we thought it would be flowing, right next to the image. The image is pushed 25 pixels over the top of it. So a little bit of difference. That way at least you have an understanding, if you're playing with this, what is happening and why things are appearing in different locations than you might have otherwise thought. So hopefully that helps clear a little bit up between fixed, relative, and absolute positioning.